Hey, this is Jamie from Stonemaier Games. I'm sitting here in a very rainy, dark office today to talk to you about game expansions. This is a topic that I've covered a few times. I've talked about my top 10 favorite expansions. I also talked about the 15 expansions available from Stonemaier Games, soon to be 16 with the Wingspan Asia expansion. And I talked about those Stonemaier expansions from a few different categories, so I kind of categorize those expansions. And a few people in the comments asked me to do that same thing, breaking down my favorite expansions by those same categories. And I even added a few based on the comments in that video. So I'll link to that video, both of those videos below, and I will talk about those categories today. So these are different categories that you can think about if you're considering designing a game expansion, basically. So the first one, and these are in no particular order really, the first one is Orleans Invasion. So this category is a new method of play, so a completely new way of playing the game, but that still relies on the core game components. And the example is Orleans Invasion. This is an expansion that takes a competitive game and turns it into a cooperative game. And I love it. I love taking that puzzle from a cooperative experience or competitive experience and bringing it into a shared group experience where you're trying to work through different events that you have to deal with. The events are really great because you know the event in advance each round. And you're just working together with all players to solve a bunch of puzzles. So there are a bunch of different goals that you have to accomplish. And at the same time, each player also has their own individual goal that they need to accomplish. I have a stuck cat over here. Hey, Walter. Here we go. So that's Orleans Invasion. I also really like in this category, so I might have more than one game for some of these. I also really like the Shards of Infinity Shadow of Salvation expansion. This is another one that takes a competitive game and turns it into a cooperative game. In this case, a cooperative campaign game, which is another category I'll mention in the comments below. But this is, at home here, this is how we play Shards of Infinity. I like playing online in the competitive mode, but in person, instead of dueling against Megan, we really like working together to beat the various bosses in Shadow of Salvation. So I really like that new mode of play. That really opened up Shards of Infinity and made it a game that I can play at home. The second category is just a more stuff expansion where you just have more of the same, or not more of the same stuff, but more of the same types of components found in the core game. More stuff to shuffle in, more variability, more things to discover as you play. Probably my favorite category of expansion here because it's just so easy to get to the table. And I have a few examples here. I love Dominion Prosperity as an expansion that does that. So Dominion Prosperity just offers more cards. And within those more cards, there are a few new mechanisms that are added in, but they're so easy to understand. And you're essentially just adding a new array of cards to those that can be chosen for the 10 cards that go on the table. And there's also a few new cards like the new what was it? Domain cards, the victory point cards, and the new coin cards that you can buy in this game. So it kind of expands the same exact types of things that are found in the core game of Dominion. I really appreciate that about Dominion Prosperity. And it also scratches that itch of, I have all this money in my hand. What do I do with it? Now you have something to do with it in Prosperity. I also really enjoy the Fantasy Realms, or part of the Fantasy Realms expansion, the Cursed Hoard. This expansion adds 3 new suits of cards, 3 new factions essentially to the game. And again, they are just shuffled into the deck, and each one does feel a little bit different than the core game. Like there's one that looks at the cards that are remaining on the table at the end of the game, for example. And yet they are extremely easy to teach, extremely easy to just shuffle into the deck and play with from now on. I always use those when I play with the Cursed Hoard expansion. There's also the actual cursed items themselves. I don't play with them as much because they make the game a little bit longer than what I want Fantasy Realms to be, but I really, really love the 3 new factions added to Fantasy Realms, and I would gladly add more factions to it as well if they ever added more. The Ambassador pick. So I obviously did not pick Stonemaier games for this list because I've already done a list about Stonemaier expansions. But Ambassadors, I did let them pick whatever they wanted for expansions. And the most common pick among Stonemaier Ambassadors was Wingspan European for this category. They really liked Wingspan European for the more stuff category of expansions. The next category is Expanded Player Count. So these are expansions that take, say, a 4-player game and turn it into a 5-player game or a 6-player game. And the Ambassador pick for this one as well was another Stonemaier game, the Invaders from Afar expansion, which takes a 5-player game and adds 6 or 6 or 7 players. Wingspan Asia actually is also a player count expansion. It takes a 5-player game and in a really beautiful way, it lets it play up to 6 or 7 players without increasing downtime and without increasing playtime because it has 2 simultaneous active players. But my pick, which is not a Stonemaier game, my pick is the Scoundrels of Skullport expansion from Lords of Waterdeep. This expansion does a lot of cool things, including the corruption mechanism in this expansion, which if you haven't looked into Scoundrels of Skullport and you like Lords of Waterdeep, I highly recommend checking out the corruption mechanism. It's a really, really cool mechanism. But it also adds an extra player. And I think there might be another expansion under the mountain or something like that adds another player. So every expansion for Lords of Waterdeep adds another player, which is really, really wonderful. I love that you can eventually play Lords of Waterdeep up to 6 players if you want to. The next category is new stuff / new options and new interface. So it's, and this will overlap with several other categories, but just the idea of an expansion adding some new stuff for you to consider. And my top 2 picks were the Cold Waters expansion for Aquatica, which I played back-to-back recently at a game day this past summer. I love what this expansion added. It does add some other things that you'll find on this list, but I really like that it just added some cards with new mechanisms in them, some new cards for you to consider as you're playing the game. It added that in a really streamlined, nice way that added to the experience of the core game. And one of my favorite games, Dune Imperium, the Rise of Ix expansion, I think is a great example of an expansion that doesn't add to the complexity of the game because it actually overlaps on several action spaces that were underused in the core game, and it tweaks them a little bit. In fact, this could fit really well into the category of an expansion that fixes a problem, a very small problem in Dune Imperium. But it just adds kind of a new interface, a new part to the board on the upper right of the board that adds some new actions, adds a few new mechanisms there. It adds a Dreadnought token that you can put into battle and your Dreadnoughts never die. That's a new type of unit that you can put into battle. And it adds some tech upgrades that you can pursue if you want to. Just some really neat little mechanisms here in Dune Imperium that give you some more options to consider. The next category is increased depth or complexity. And again, there's a lot of overlap on this list. A lot of these expansions could fit into multiple categories, but my picks for this, or my pick, was Seven Wonders Leaders. Seven Wonders Leaders adds a 4th round to the game, and it's essentially a prelude round, a first round of the game where you're drafting leader cards, and you are playing those cards in a very similar way over the course of the game. Well, actually, no, it's a little different. You're playing them in a little different way than you play normal cards. They do have cost and requirements, but they add just another card type that you can play each round if you want to. But the draft is very similar to the core game, so you're already familiar with the draft at Seven Wonders. You're drafting these leaders. And they do add a bit of complexity because each of the leaders adds, or many of them add new icons for you to consider and new abilities that you have to kind of look through a thesaurus and appendix to understand what those abilities do. So it does add to the complexity of the game and adds the depth of an added length basically to the round structure, the 3-round structure of Seven Wonders. Ambassadors, I haven't played this expansion, but Ambassadors picked the Upstairs Downstairs expansion for Obsession as an expansion that adds depth and complexity. The next category is a fun one. Expansions that add campaigns to core games that didn't already have a campaign to them. And a few, one core example of this that I really, really enjoy. I already mentioned Shadow of Salvation. I enjoy the campaign in that. The other one is the Emergence of Shy Pluto. That is the space-based expansion that adds a short campaign where you are trying to learn about Pluto and deal with some new problems, and it adds new mechanisms to the game that you can permanently leave in the game from then on. And that reminds me a little bit of the Ambassador pick for this category of my expansion, Scythe, The Rise of Fenris, which adds an 8-game campaign to a game of Scythe if you want to play it. And it kind of caps off the Scythe trilogy. We have a trilogy of expansions, and it caps off that trilogy. So I do like these, and I like that these aren't too long. Emergence of Shy Pluto is, I believe, a 5-game campaign. And it's completely resettable, as is the Rise of Fenris. They're not legacy campaigns. There is the Shadow of Salvation campaign, I think, is only 3 or 4 games if you win those games. So I like these kind of short, snappy campaigns for games that you typically are used to playing, resetting every time you play. So I think the shortness of a campaign is pretty crucial if you're making a campaign expansion. Next up, we have asymmetry. There's some great examples of this, I think. So there are games that add more asymmetry. I mentioned the Rise of Ix that adds new asymmetrical leaders, but the game already had asymmetry. So this category of expansions are expansions where the core game did not have asymmetrical elements, and the expansion adds them. And two of my favorites, really, it was hard to pick between these two because I really love them. One is Tzolk'in, the Mayan calendar. The Tribes and Prophecies expansions. The Tribes add asymmetric factions that do change the way you play, or at least change the starting setup. They change some core element of how you play. I really enjoy them. And I also really enjoy the leaders added to the Expedition Leaders expansion of Lost Ruins of Arnak. Really, really cool special abilities that feel very asymmetric and unique in Lost Ruins of Arnak. So I think this is a great category to explore, and almost a great reason to consider not putting asymmetry into the core game. Just kind of get everything working properly in the core game, make sure you know the game really, really well, and then later on add asymmetry through an expansion. In the next category, I have new locations. So this is a really, really cool way to add variability to a game, where you simply add a new location for you to play. So kind of a classic example of this would be Ticket to Ride. Ticket to Ride adds new maps. But some of my favorite examples are the Sunken Treasures expansion for Clank. Clank has a whole series of expansions that just essentially add new maps and also some new cards, some new slight mechanisms, but really the focus is the new board that they add to Clank. And also in Downforce. Downforce's expansions are all about the new courses that you're running. And the example I have here is the Danger Circuit expansion. It actually has my favorite racetrack in Downforce, one that has some paths that loop around and cross over where you enter and exit that loop, creating some interesting congestion that can have leaders pull away, or it can add really a nice catch-up mechanism to people who have fallen behind in Downforce. So I love the Danger Circuit expansion in Downforce, and then just the idea of expansions adding new maps, new locations, new places. The ambassador pick for this category was the Underworld location for Root. By far, this was actually the top pick. It seems that ambassadors really love that Underworld expansion for Root, which I have not played. The next category, which I mentioned earlier a little bit, is expansions that fix a problem. Expansions, I would think that most playtesters, or most publishers, playtest every expansion quite a bit. And they know the game really well, too. So, actually, no, this isn't about really the expansion itself, but it's about playtesting the core game itself. But every now and then, something slips through, and you find that players aren't using something as much as you thought, or player psychology works out a little bit different than you thought from the playtesting data. You just get a lot more data from a game after the playtest is finished, and I think it's great for that publishers have the opportunity to fix little problems in expansions if they want to, if there's demand for it as well. And so some examples of that. And this was maybe a little bit of a stretch for this category, but the Alchemists from the Quacks of Quedlinburg, I thought that this added some... I played this recently, I thought it fixed maybe a very small thing from the core game, which was it really gives you a strong reason to go after a variety of tokens. This is an expansion that has you advancing on a path based on a few different things. One, if you ended up exactly with 7 of the white tokens, 7 value of the white tokens at the end of the round. 2, how many different colors of tokens you pulled from the bag in the first place. That encourages variety. And 3, whether or not your neighbor's busted. So every one of those things lets you advance on this track and triggers some different abilities. But I think it does a great job of encouraging players to go after a variety of tokens, which is something that I didn't always see from the Quacks of Quedlinburg. And also encourage players to really get very close to busting if they wanted to. I wouldn't even say these are big problems, but I enjoyed that it encouraged me to consider things that I hadn't normally considered in Quacks of Quedlinburg. And also, the Ambassador pick, by far, I haven't played this one, but Ambassadors were very passionate about the Rise of the Empire expansion for Star Wars Rebellion. Apparently that fixes a big problem from Star Wars Rebellion. The next category is easiest to teach. I love expansions that are really easy to get to the table, really easy to teach, and this is great because not only is it easy to get to the table of someone who already knows the game, but it also makes it really easy for you to leave those expansion components inside the core game. You don't have to separate them, so that when you teach someone who's never played the game at all, it's just as easy to explain those expansion components. This isn't always necessary for expansion. Sometimes people do want added depth and complexity, but I think this is nice when expansions do this. And my favorite pick for that is the Manufactions expansion for Fantastic Factories. I think this expansion does that really well. It does add new things to the game. It adds new cards. It adds a new token type that lets you adjust dice by +or -1. But they're so intuitive and easy to add that I think most people wouldn't even know that they weren't in the core game in the first place. So I really love that about the Manufactions expansion. And again, Ambassadors actually picked another Stonemaier game for this one. They picked the Wingspan European expansion. Again, they thought that was extremely easy to teach because you just essentially shuffle in the new cards. There is a new mechanism in Wingspan European that introduces the idea of powers that trigger at the end of the round, but that's really easy to teach as well. So that was the Ambassador pick. Now we're getting down to the 4 categories that I added after the previous video. And this next category are promo packs. Promo packs kind of act as little mini expansions for games. You don't have to do a big, robust expansion every time. Sometimes you can just introduce a small promo pack of tiles or tokens or cards. And my pick for this, I have 2 picks. One is the Terra Mystica pack, the Terra Mystica promo pack that adds more city tokens. So whenever you complete a city, you get or a town, you get a special token. Adds a few more of those. I really like that. And the other pick that I have on hand here are the Maps expansion. I guess this fits in better into the locations category. This is for cartographers, but the maps, they essentially feel like promos because this is it. This is everything that you're getting here. You just get a new map for cartographers, and they add a few little twists to the rules, but and oftentimes they're double-sided. Let's see if the back is different. The back is the same in these, but I just think these are really, really cool. They have these kind of promo packs of new maps, and they're really nice for publishers too, I think, because they're very easy to add to your cart. If you're selling stuff on a web store or a crowdfunding campaign and you've already spent $50, it's pretty easy to add a $5 promo pack to it, especially if it's something as nice and satisfying as a map pack like this. So Terra Mystica and Cartographers map packs. The Ambassador picks, obviously, this is a big one for Stonemaier Games now, are the promo packs for Rolling Realms. So like here are the 3 most recent promo packs for Rolling Realms. This is a game that is almost, the entire future of the game is almost entirely geared towards these promo packs that are based sometimes on Stonemaier games like Smitten, and sometimes they're based on games from other publishers like Honeybuzz and A Feast for Odin. The nice thing about these is that people can pick and choose exactly the promo packs that they want. So if someone really loves Honeybuzz, they might get that one, but maybe they don't care about Smitten as much, or they don't care about the mechanisms in it. They can pick and choose the ones they want. The next category is a recharge or scenario pack. There are really very few examples of recharge packs in the tabletop game space. This is typically limited to legacy games that let you replay the legacy game by adding a recharge pack. And I think the only 2 that I am aware of are Aeon's End and Charterstone. There might be other ones, but those are the main 2 that come to mind. However, so I added Scenario Pack to this, and that expands this category to include games like Time Stories. Time Stories has a core game, and then you can buy expansions for it, or really it's the original version of Time Stories. You can add expansions that offer you new scenarios to that core game. This is one of my favorite games of all time. I played through, I think, every published version of the different scenario packs, and my favorite is A Prophecy of Dragons. I really, really loved A Prophecy of Dragons, and it basically takes all the things that many of the components that you've already bought, that you already have for the core game, and it gives you another use for them through a new scenario to play in. So yeah, I really love A Prophecy of Dragons from Time Stories. Let me know in the comments below what your favorite expansion is, what your favorite scenario is for Time Stories. 2 more categories remain. The second to last category are expansions that decrease the playing time. So this is kind of solving a problem as well. If you had a game that was overstaying its welcome at the table, it was playing a little bit too long, maybe you offer an accelerated start. You offer a way to play the game a little bit faster. And actually, Wingspan Asia does this a little bit for higher player counts, for the 6 and 7 player count. But Terraforming Mars Prelude was my pick and the Ambassador's pick for an expansion that accelerates the beginning of the game, so you can kind of ramp up immediately, a lot faster in Prelude, and get to the good stuff in Terraforming Mars, not Terra Mystica, Terraforming Mars. And Prelude does that brilliantly by just giving you more stuff right at the beginning of the game. Does a great job of doing that. I think, yeah, that's a great type of expansion if it's needed. If the core game is outstaying its welcome on the table. The last category are standalone expansions. This is a tough category to get into, to talk about, because essentially this is another way of saying this is a game. But I think the differentiator here is that you can take things from a standalone expansion, as you can do in Wingspan Asia. This is a standalone expansion. So you can play Wingspan Asia from 1 to 2 players in a special duet mode. And you can combine in other bird cards and other bonus cards from other versions of Wingspan as you play that mode. But there are some components in this box that you need to play that mode. So I like this a lot, and I like that you can take some of these components, like you can take the bird cards from Wingspan Asia, and you can use them in other expansions or the Wingspan core game. So an example of this, or a couple examples, are Cartographer's Heroes is one. So Cartographer's Heroes is one that adds like new maps, new abilities, new cards that you can just shuffle into the original Cartographers. And then very recently, a recent favorite is Marvel Dice Throne. So Marvel Dice Throne is a standalone game by itself. You don't need anything else to play the Dice Throne game. You can just play it with this. Or you can take these characters and add them to another game of Dice Throne. So Season 1, Season 2, the smaller packs. So I think this is a great way to expand a game like this, to make it standalone. You don't have to rely on the core game. You don't need the core game. There are no overlapping components between the two other than the rulebook. I think that's the key catch here. If you have a lot of redundant components, that's a reason maybe not to do a standalone expansion and just make it a normal expansion. So Marvel Dice Throne, I think, does that really well. The Ambassador pick was very similar, a game that I haven't really gotten as deep into, but that is Unmatched. Unmatched has, every box is a standalone expansion where you can play it by itself, or you can take those characters and compete against other characters that you already have from other sets of Unmatched. So I think that's a great way to do it. I think Marvel Champions does it to a certain extent. I think some packs aren't standalone, but some are. I don't know that game all that well, but that did show up on the Ambassador pick list as well. So those are the 14 categories to think about. If you're designing an expansion, what do you want to get out of the expansion that you're designing? What do you want to offer to players? And oftentimes I think it's a combination of a few of these. I wouldn't try to do everything with every expansion though. Obviously, if you're trying to do a slim promo pack, you can only do a few things with it. It might just be, a more stuff promo pack where you add a few more cards to the game. But yeah, a lot of stuff to think about. Let me know in these categories. Pick maybe a few of these categories that encapsulate your favorite types of expansions, and let me know your top picks of expansions within those categories. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks.